Voting isn't a divine right. I mean, it really isn't some sacred law handed down from the heavens.
Right, definitely not.
And your basic rights. They might actually just be like a temporary lease traded for your quote-unquote decency. Today, we are tearing up the script on what it means to be a citizen.
It's a complete paradigm shift, honestly.
Yeah, because we generally think of citizenship as this unbreakable, almost metaphysical bond. You know, you are born with it, it's yours, end of story. But history has a massive, terrifying plot twist waiting for you.
Oh, absolutely. It's wild.
Imagine a state possessing an invisible pair of scissors. They don't use these scissors to cut your life short. They don't use them to cut you off from the physical world by throwing you in a dark, damp cell. Instead, they use them to cut your social existence completely out of reality. Welcome to this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into this.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in a brilliant, totally mind-bending book by Dr. Timon de Groot called Citizens into Dishonored Felons, Felony Disenfranchisement, Honor and Rehabilitation in Germany, 1806 to 1933. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Our mission today is to uncover a forgotten, terrifying punishment used in Germany for over a century. A mechanism that didn't just punish the body, but sought to assassinate your standing in society. It was called the deprivation of civil honor.
Such a chilling phrase, really. The deprivation of civil honor.
Right. And our rule for today, no academic jargon, just short, punchy, high-emotion facts. Prepare for everything you thought you knew about justice, rights, and the very concept of honor to be flipped totally upside down.
It really is a complete paradigm shift, like you said. And Dr. de Groot does a phenomenal job of excavating this lost history.
So set the stage for us. What did punishment look like back then?
Well, when we think of the criminal justice system today, we almost universally assume its primary goal is functional, right? Like to keep the streets safe, to deter violence, to lock up dangerous people.
Sure, basic public safety.
Exactly. But what this research reveals is that for a very long time, specifically in 19th and early 20th century Germany, punishment was actually the state's moral compass. It wasn't just about public safety. It was a tool used to legally define who was and who was not a proper human being. The state was basically in the business of moral hygiene.
Moral hygiene. That sounds so clinical and terrifying at the same time. And what's wild to me is that this wasn't some rare, obscure thing happening to a handful of high-profile traitors.
Not at all. It was incredibly common.
Right. Dr. de Groot shines a massive spotlight on the sheer scale of this practice. We are talking about an industrial level of disenfranchisement here.
The numbers are staggering.
Between 1882 and 1914, about 15,000 Germans every single year were stripped of their civil rights.
Yeah,
15,000.
Yeah, every single year.
That was 5% of all prison sentences at the time. If you got this sentence, you essentially became a ghost in the machine. You know, you're physically walking the streets of Berlin or Munich, but legally, you didn't exist in the same universe as your neighbor.
Precisely. To understand the mechanics of this, we really have to look at what civil honor actually meant back then. It wasn't just, a vague sense of self-respect. It was a tangible legal framework.
Like a literal checklist of things you could or couldn't do.
Exactly. The state weaponized the concept of honor to create a legal caste of second-class citizens, or perhaps more accurately, untouchables. If the state deemed your crime dishonorable, you lost your civil privileges.
So what did you actually lose? Give us the breakdown.
Well, you couldn't vote, you couldn't serve in the military, you couldn't hold any public office. But it went way deeper into everyday life than that.
Deeper how? Like beyond voting?
Oh, yeah. In some cases, you couldn't even be a legal guardian to a child.
Wait, really? Your own child?
Sometimes, yes. And you couldn't sign a public document as a witness. You were legally untrustworthy.
It is basically the 19th century equivalent of getting permanently shadow banned from real life.
That's a great way to put it.
You are physically there, but legally and socially, your microphone has been muted, your avatar has been grayed out, and you have been erased. The government gets to decide if you have this magical aura of honor, and if they say no, poof, your voice is gone.
You are no longer the ideal citizen. You are a reject.
But how did this actually play out in the streets? I mean, did people just accept that they were suddenly legal ghosts?
What's fascinating here is how this punishment transcended the actual penal code and bled directly into the free market and civil society. This wasn't just a matter of not being able to vote once every few years.
Right, because voting wasn't even that common or powerful for the average person back then anyway.
Exactly. But if you lost your civil honor, you might be denied a vital trade license.
Oh, so it hits your wallet.
Big time. If you were a factory worker, you might be kicked off a workers' council. Even early social insurance funds, which were just beginning to develop in Germany at this time, might exclude you because you were deemed a moral hazard.
Wow. So the state was broadcasting a signal to the entire society, basically saying, this person is fundamentally untrustworthy. Do not do business with them. Do not rely on them. Do not treat them as an equal.
Yes, the ultimate social assassination. The state creates this elaborate, devastating machinery to crush the souls of criminals.
But here is the ultimate plot twist in Dr. de Groot's research. The state, meaning the rich elite lawmakers, the aristocracy, the high court judges, they thought this was the most terrifying punishment imaginable.
Well, they took it incredibly seriously.
Right. To them, taking away your voting rights and your public standing was a fate worse than death. But the people who actually received this punishment, the lower classes,
They thought it was hilarious.
they literally laughed at it.
It is a stunning historical disconnect, and it highlights a massive canyon between the classes. The elites, the lawmakers who drafted these penal codes, were entirely obsessed with national morality and the prestige of citizenship.
Because that's all they had, right? Their prestige.
Exactly. For a Prussian aristocrat, honor was everything. It was your lifeblood. But the lower classes, the factory workers laboring 14 hours a day, the starving tenant farmers, they just wanted a bicycle and some bread.
Yeah, you can't eat honor.
Right. To them, civil honor was an abstract, aristocratic luxury. You couldn't eat it. You couldn't spend it. You couldn't use it to heat your home in the winter.
I love how the book illustrates this. Imagine the government threatening to take away what they consider your absolute most prized possession, and your reaction is just to roll your eyes.
The historical cartoons are just incredible for showing this.
Yes. De Groot brings up these amazing historical cartoons from satirical magazines at the time, like Fliegende Blätter and Simplicissimus. They are so telling about the public mood.
The Ox cartoon is my favorite.
I was just going to bring that one up. Let me describe it for you guys listening. It's from 1907. There's this scruffy farmer who was just convicted of arson. He's standing next to his massive, beautiful, award-winning ox.
A very proud-looking animal.
Yeah, very majestic. And the farmer pats the ox and says, "Don't be so proud. I lost my rights because I set a couple little things on fire, but don't worry. In a year, my sentence will be up and we'll be completely equal again."
That cartoon perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, the farmer is equating his temporary loss of honor to being no better than a farm animal. But he says it with complete indifference.
He literally does not care.
Not at all. And there's another brilliant one where a judge solemnly, with great gravitas, tells a working-class man that he has officially lost his right to vote.
The judge probably expects him to fall to his knees weeping.
Right. The judge expects the man to break down in tears. Instead, the man just shrugs, puts his hands in his pockets, and replies, "Great, I wasn't going to vote anyway."
So good. It's just whatever, man.
These cartoons aren't just jokes. They are historical evidence of a failed psychological weapon. The state was trying to inflict deep existential pain and profound shame. But the people being punished were completely apathetic.
Which raises a huge glowing neon question for me. If the punishment was a joke to the people receiving it, why did the state keep using it? I mean, bureaucracy is expensive.
Incredibly expensive.
Right. Why go through all the effort to print the forms, hold the hearings, and officially strip someone of a right they didn't even care about? If the dog doesn't care that you took away its imaginary bone, why keep doing it?
That is the crucial question, and the answer is deeply psychological. The punishment wasn't actually meant for the person receiving it.
Wait, what?
It was for the state itself and for the elite class running the state.
Oh, I see.
By defining who was dishonorable, the state was aggressively defining who was honorable. It was a mechanism for the elite to elevate their own status and validate their own moral superiority.
Think of it like an exclusive country club.
Exactly. The only way a club feels truly exclusive and prestigious is if you are actively kicking people out of it or maintaining a strict list of who isn't allowed in.
If everyone is special, no one is special.
Right. It was about the emotional expressiveness of the governing body. They needed to constantly prove to themselves that they were maintaining a righteous, moral order.
So it's pure projection. The state is basically insecure. They need to feel morally superior, so they invent this paper decency. They create an invisible VIP section of society just so they can bounce people from it.
That's a perfect analogy.
But to understand how deadly serious the state eventually took this joke, we have to fast forward. We are going to jump to a moment in history where this seemingly abstract, bureaucratic concept of honor literally made a monster lose his mind.
Yes, we are moving ahead to 1941, deep into the era of Nazi Germany. To understand the trajectory of this law, we have to examine how the legal and bureaucratic mechanics of the time functioned, and how this 19th century concept of honor mutated under a totalitarian regime.
Exactly. We need to be very objective here and just look closely at the documents and the historical record. It is 1941. Nazi SS leader Heinrich Himmler is staring at a stack of court verdicts.
From the Sondergericht in Berlin.
Right, a special court. Several Jewish prisoners have been convicted of illegal trade with ration cards, a crime born out of desperate necessity in a heavily rationed economy. And Himmler is absolutely exploding with rage. He is furious.
Livid.
Why? Because the judge sentenced them to death but also officially stripped them of their civil honor.
Now, you might intuitively think Himmler would be pleased with the harshest possible sentences, right? Like the piling on of punishments.
Yeah, that would fit his whole profile.
But he was furious about the specific mechanical legal phrasing used by the judge. In the German Penal Code at the time, which had been carried over and adapted from the 19th century, this specific punishment was officially called the deprivation of civil rights of honor.
Okay.
Himmler's dark, twisted logic was rooted in pure racial ideology. He argued that you cannot strip honor from someone who never possessed it in the first place.
It is a chilling look into the totalitarian mind. By officially punishing Jewish people with a loss of honor, the Nazi judges were legally, accidentally implying that Jewish people actually possessed honor to begin with.
Exactly. The bureaucracy of the court was contradicting the ideology of the regime.
Himmler believed that honor was strictly tied to Aryan blood. It wasn't a behavioral trait, it was a biological one.
To him, acknowledging through a court document that a Jewish person could lose honor was basically admitting they were human beings with inherent dignity and a standing in the civic community prior to the crime.
This specific incident created a massive, bizarre bureaucratic crisis within the Nazi Ministry of Justice, didn't it?
Oh, huge. Legal experts in the ministry pointed out a mechanical problem. The German Penal Code explicitly prescribed this punishment for certain crimes, like fraud or illegal trading. And mechanically, the law was written to apply to anyone on German soil who committed the act, regardless of their status.
So the judges were literally just following the rule book.
They were just following the literal flowchart of the Penal Code. But Himmler ordered the judges to stop using it immediately, causing a collision between the written law and the dictator's racial mandates.
So what do? How do you solve a legal crisis when the fundamental mechanism of your law contradicts your own horrific racism? How does the bureaucracy fix that glitch?
The Nazi Minister of Justice at the time, Franz Schlegelberger, had to engineer a bizarre and revealing compromise. They couldn't just rewrite the entire penal code overnight, and they wanted to maintain the appearance of a functioning, rule-bound legal system.
Right. They love their paperwork.
They really did.
Yeah.
So they decided to keep the mechanical function of the punishment, but they literally scrubbed the word honor from the paperwork.
Wait, they just deleted the word.
Yes. The ministry issued a directive. If a Jewish person was convicted of these crimes, the judge would still apply Section 34 of the Penal Code, the section that revokes civil privileges and shadow bans you from society. But the judges were strictly forbidden from saying the words loss of honor or deprived of civil privileges out loud in the courtroom.
Or writing it down.
Right. They couldn't write it on the official verdict either.
What's fascinating here is how the legal system bent completely over backwards to maintain the illusion of the rule of law while totally destroying the actual rights and dignity of the people.
It's terrifying bureaucracy.
They kept the mechanical function. You still lose your rights, but they erased the moral implication because it didn't fit their racial ideology. It is bureaucratic gymnastics serving pure evil. They are literally editing the dictionary in real time to make sure their bigotry is legally sound.
Precisely. They upheld the fiction of a functioning legal system while entirely hollowing out its foundational principles. But to really grasp how the legal system arrived at this twisted, highly weaponized point, we can't just look in 1941.
No, we have to go way back.
We have to rewind back to the 1800s. We have to look at the very foundation of German citizenship and ask how the state got the power to hand out and take away honor in the first place.
Right. Because if you are listening to this right now, you probably think your citizenship is a sacred, unalienable right written in the stars.
Most of us do today.
You think you were born with it? It's stamped on your passport, and short of committing like massive treason, it can never be taken away. Well, Try reading the 1851 Prussian Penal Code.
It's a very different story.
Your rights were just a temporary perk. It was basically a free trial subscription to society, and you had to constantly agree to the terms of service.
That is a very apt way to describe it, honestly. In the early to mid-19th century, the various German states were transitioning from an older feudal system to a modern bureaucratic state.
Moving away from kings and lords.
Right. In the feudal system, you were a subject of a monarch. But now they were creating this new concept of state citizenship. However, this wasn't the democratic, inalienable citizenship we think of today.
It had conditions.
Heavy conditions. Legal thinkers at the time, like the prominent jurist Anselmo Zaccaria, made it very clear in their writings. They argued that rights of citizenship are conditional rights.
Conditional, meaning they come with massive strings attached. If you violate the terms, your account is deleted, you don't own the house, you're just renting it, and the landlord can evict you if he doesn't like your vibe.
Exactly. The state used this conditionality as a foundational tool to build an entire social class based on absolute moral obedience.
So it was a control tactic.
Totally. If you wanted the privileges of a citizen, which meant the right to serve in the army, the right to vote in local or national elections, the right to hold office, or even the right to testify under oath in a courtroom, you had to constantly prove you were morally worthy of the trust the state placed in you.
Citizenship wasn't a baseline, it was an elevated status you had to maintain.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for the average person walking around in Prussia in, say, 1855? It means the state had you on a leash. You were always perpetually on probation. You didn't own your rights. You were just borrowing them from the government. And the rent you paid was your good behavior and your decency.
It was an incredibly effective way to consolidate state power during a period of rapid modernization. By maintaining the constant threat of taking these privileges away, the state forced citizens into a rigid framework of moral compliance.
They kept everyone in line.
Yeah, you weren't just obeying the law to avoid going to a physical prison. You were obeying the law to prove you belonged in the political and social community. The state became the ultimate arbiter of your moral worth.
But what exactly got your probation revoked? This is where I think modern listeners will get completely thrown off.
The logic is very different from today.
Right, because if citizenship is a sacred trust, you'd intuitively think the fastest way to lose it would be committing the ultimate physical crimes. Murder, violent assault, tearing someone limb from limb in the street. You would think violence equals dishonor.
But you'd be dead wrong.
And this is where the logic of the 19th century courts gets truly wild.
This is where we encounter the philosophy of a highly influential 19th century German jurist named Adolf Wick. Wick wrote extensively on this topic, creating what we might call a mathematical formula for morality and punishment.
A math formula for morality, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, he was trying to justify intellectually why certain crimes resulted in the loss of civil honor, while other, seemingly more brutal crimes did not.
Right, because in the eyes of the 19th century German court, punching a guy in the face and breaking his jaw was seen as a minor slip-up, a crime of passion. But lying on a piece of paper, forging a signature, that made you an absolute monster who needed to be excised from society. Make it make sense. How did Wick justify this?
Wick's theory centered entirely on the concept of public trust. He argued that the foundation of the modern state wasn't violence or physical borders or even the monarch. It was trust between citizens and trust between the citizen and the state.
Okay, I'm following.
Therefore, crimes that broke that invisible web of trust were the absolute worst offenses a citizen could commit.
Okay, let's unpack Wick's math here. Let's say we have two criminals. Criminal A commits physical violence. He gets into a drunken brawl at a tavern and seriously hurts someone.
Wick says, hey, that's just human passion.
It's an open, honest outburst of raw emotion. It's bad, sure, you go to jail for a few months, but it doesn't mean your soul is corrupted. It just means you have a bad temper.
Right. Violence, in Wick's view, didn't necessarily indicate a dishonorable disposition. It was a failure of impulse control, not a failure of character.
But then look at criminal B. Criminal B commits fraud or theft or counterfeiting or perjury.
Those acts require cold, calculated deception.
They require you to look society in the eye, smile, and sneakily undermine it for your own profit.
That, to Wick and the jurists of his time, destroys the very fabric of societal trust. You can't build a state if you don't know if your neighbor is lying to you.
It's so counterintuitive to how our legal system prioritizes violent crime today. Like, we put murderers away for life, but a white-collar fraudster might get a couple years in a minimum security place.
Exactly. The priorities were totally flipped.
But wait, if we zoom out, is it really that different from how human psychology works? Think about modern cancel culture and social media.
Oh, that's an interesting parallel.
It's like how society might forgive a celebrity for getting into a drunken bar fight or throwing a phone at an assistant. We read the tabloid, we say, oh, they have anger issues, they need to go to rehab or therapy. And 2 years later, they're starring in a blockbuster movie again.
People love a comeback story.
Right. But if we find out that same celebrity was secretly running a massive crypto scam, siphoning millions from their working class fans behind a web of shell companies, we completely cancel them. Their career is over, they are socially dead.
We judge the calculated, cold-blooded deception way harsher than the momentary burst of violence.
Exactly. That is a phenomenal analogy, and it maps perfectly onto the 19th century German legal mindset. The state wasn't just punishing the physical manifestation of the crime, they were actively punishing your character. They were evaluating your soul.
If you committed a crime of deceit, you were permanently branded with a dishonorable disposition. You were no longer trustworthy, and therefore you were no longer fit to hold the privileges of citizenship. You had proven you didn't respect the social contract.
And what was the absolute worst crime for your soul? The one that guaranteed, without fail, that you would lose your civil honor.
Telling a lie in a courtroom. Perjury.
Perjury, wow!
Perjury is the fascinating pivot point in this whole history. It represents a massive shift in how the state viewed its own authority. To understand why perjury was punished so brutally with a loss of honor, we have to look at how the definition of perjury changed over time.
It wasn't always a crime against the state. Right?
No, for most of European history, going back to the Middle Ages, perjury was considered primarily a religious offense. Under older laws like the Three Siena Code of 1769 in Austria, perjury was explicitly defined as blasphemy.
Because you put your hand on a Bible, swore an oath to God, and then lied. You weren't offending the judge, you were offending the Almighty. It was a fast track to hell.
Exactly. It was a spiritual crime.
But then, as society modernizes, suddenly it becomes a fast track to losing your citizenship. Why? Because you bruised the fragile ego of the state.
Precisely. Over the 18th and 19th centuries, heavily influenced by the Enlightenment and the secularization of power, the modern bureaucratic state began to slowly replace the church as the ultimate authority in a citizen's life.
The state becomes the new god.
We see this shift clearly in the Josephina Code of 1787, and it accelerates into the 19th century. Perjury was no longer about making God mad or risking your immortal soul. It was redefined conceptually as a crime against public trust and state order.
The state basically stood up and said, look at me, I am the captain now.
That's exactly what happened.
Lying in court didn't mean you were a sinner who needed a priest anymore. It meant you threw a massive wrench into the gears of the state's justice machine. You broke the secular contract of trust.
And because the courtroom oath was the ultimate symbol of the state's trust in you as a citizen, they were trusting you to help them discover the truth. Breaking that oath was the ultimate betrayal. Legal scholars of the era, like Carl Mittermeier, literally equated perjury with counterfeiting money.
That is a crazy comparison. Lying on the stand is like printing fake money.
In their logic, yes. Counterfeiting destroys the economic trust of the state. Perjury destroys the judicial trust of the state. Both acts poison the well.
So they get treated the same.
Therefore, perjury became the ultimate dishonorable crime. If you lied under oath, you lost your civil rights. Period. The statistics are staggering. Between 60 to 80% of all people convicted of perjury in this era lost their civil privileges. The judges didn't hesitate.
It was an automatic trigger for social death. You lie about seeing a horse get stolen and suddenly you can't vote for the rest of your life.
It was incredibly harsh.
But while the courts were obsessed with perjury and the bureaucracy of honor, there was one institution in Germany that cared about honor even more than the judges. An institution that would literally rather bleed out and die on the battlefield than let a dishonorable person join its ranks.
You are, of course, talking about the Prussian military, which was the beating heart of the German Empire.
The army. They were so deeply obsessed with honor, they actively turned away perfectly healthy recruits, even when they desperately needed soldiers to fill the ranks.
The military in Imperial Germany occupied a highly privileged, almost autonomous, mystical position in society. It was viewed not just as a functional defense force, but as the sacred container of national honor.
Right.
And the military brass, the aristocratic generals, firmly believed that this honor existed precisely because it was exclusive. It had to be kept pure.
Right, but there's a huge mechanical contradiction here. They had universal conscription. Every healthy young man of a certain age was legally required to serve.
Right.
How do you keep an elite, snobby, exclusive country club attitude when you are legally required to accept the unwashed masses from the factories and the farms?
This raises an important question, and the answer is found in the legal firewall they built, Section 31 of the Penal Code.
Section 31.
This section permanently banned anyone who had served time in a heavy penitentiary, which automatically meant they had lost their civil honor from ever joining the military.
So it was their filter.
For the Army, this ban was their absolute last line of defense against the democratization of their ranks. As the masses flooded in through universal conscription, the Army used the concept of dishonor to filter out anyone they deemed morally inferior, which often heavily overlapped with the lower classes.
Right, poor people were more likely to go to a heavy penitentiary.
Exactly. They clung to the principle, dishonorable equals defenseless. You are not worthy of holding a weapon for the Kaiser.
Let me give you guys a crazy historical example of how deep this obsession went. In 1905, there's this judge named Schmulder.
Ah, yes, the Schmulder proposal.
He's looking at the rising crime rates among young men, the juvenile delinquents in the cities. He writes a proposal and says, hey, we have all these wayward youth getting into trouble. Let's draft them into the Army. The iron discipline of the military, the early mornings, the drilling, will reform them and turn them into good citizens.
Honestly, it sounds totally logical for the time.
It sounds like the plot of 100 modern movies. The bad kid goes to boot camp and learns respect.
It sounds like a standard, pragmatic, reformatory idea. But the military brass, including the incredibly powerful Field Marshal Helmuth von Moltke, completely lost their minds when they read this proposal.
They freaked out. They basically wrote back and said, we are not a reform school for degenerate criminals.
That was essentially their exact response.
They argued that allowing ex-convicts, even young ones, to wear the uniform would instantly destroy the moral soundness and the mystical honor of the entire army. They claimed that regular, honorable soldiers would feel deeply insulted having to stand shoulder to shoulder in the barracks with someone who had lost their civil rights.
It really highlights how honor was used as an inflexible boundary marker. The Army refused to compromise its perceived moral purity, even at the cost of losing thousands of potential able-bodied soldiers.
The uniform was sacred.
The uniform itself was a symbol of unblemished civil honor. To let a dishonored person wear it was to defile the institution.
This obsession with pure, untainted honor sounds very principled on the surface, very noble. You picture these stoic generals holding the line, until you see how the politicians and judges actually used it in practice, because they weaponized this exact concept, specifically the perjury laws, to completely destroy their political rivals.
This is where we enter the era of bare-knuckle class warfare in the courtroom. We're going to look closely at how the legal mechanisms were deployed by different political factions during the imperial era.
Right. When the law brags about being totally neutral and blind, watch your back. It's usually hiding a knife.
Sadly, yes.
In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a massive existential political struggle in Germany between the conservative establishment, the aristocrats, the industrialists, and the rapidly rising working class, represented politically by the Social Democratic Party, or the SPD.
A huge clash of ideologies.
And suddenly, right in the middle of this political war, the conviction rates for perjury among the working class and SPD members absolutely skyrocketed.
It wasn't a statistical anomaly or a sudden epidemic of lying. The conservative establishment viewed the SPD not just as political opponents asking for higher wages, but as a fundamental threat to the state itself.
They hated them.
They viewed them as godless atheists who threatened the moral fabric of society. And because perjury was defined as the ultimate crime of moral depravity, it became the perfect, seemingly objective weapon to use against them.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we have to look at the mechanics of how they did this. They set up what we can only call perjury traps in court.
Perjury traps, yes.
Here's how it worked. The SPD was busy organizing workers into unions and leading strikes. The state would bring these workers into court, perhaps during a minor dispute over a strike or a scuffle on a picket line.
Just a basic administrative hearing, often.
Right. They would put the union organizer on the stand and make them swear an oath. Then they would meticulously cross-examine them. The moment the worker misspoke on the stand, got a date wrong, or if their testimony slightly contradicted a police officer's testimony, bam, the conservative judge slammed them with a perjury charge.
And remember, the mechanical formula established by Adolf Witt perjury equals a dishonorable disposition.
And a dishonorable disposition automatically equals the loss of civil rights.
Exactly. If an SPD member or a union organizer was convicted of perjury, they lost their right to vote, they lost their right to run for office, they were legally decapitated from the political body.
A single mismatched testimony about what time a protest started meant you were legally kicked out of the political arena for years.
It was devastating to the labor movement.
The state was assassinating their political opponents without firing a single shot. It was political strangulation via red tape and judicial technicalities. And the most infuriating part, the conservatives did all of this while looking down their noses and claiming they were just upholding the sacred morality of the courtroom.
Oh, the hypocrisy was intense.
They said, we aren't targeting socialists. We have nothing against their politics. We're just targeting liars.
It was a highly effective strategy of delegitimization. By branding political opponents as perjurers, they turned a legitimate political disagreement about labor rights into a question of moral character.
It's character assassination.
They were signaling to the broader public, you can't trust these SPD people to vote or hold office because they don't even respect the sacred oath of the courtroom. They are fundamentally dishonest.
It's the ultimate bad faith use of the justice system. And if you want to see exactly how hypocritical this justice system got, if you want to see the mask completely slip, you just have to look at how the courts treated the people who actually broke the law with violence, depending on their politics.
Yes. The contrast in how the imperial justice system handled different types of political violence is staggering. We have to look at how the courts defined honorable versus dishonorable crimes entirely based on the political leanings and class of the offender.
Let's play a game of imperial German justice. I'll give you scenario A. You are a wealthy, right-wing aristocrat, maybe a cavalry officer. You get into an argument over a perceived insult. You challenge a man to a duel which is strictly illegal, and you shoot him dead in cold blood in a park at dawn.
Okay, scenario A.
Scenario B. You are a working-class, left-wing anarchist. You secretly print and pass out an anti-government pamphlet in a factory demanding better wages. Who gets the harsh, dishonoring punishment?
Under this system, the left-wing anarchist gets absolutely crushed.
Unbelievable.
The courts treated aristocratic offenders, like duelers, as honorable criminals. Even though dueling was a violent, illegal act that resulted in murder, the judges, who were often aristocrats themselves, believed the dueler acted out of a strong, albeit misguided, commitment to a noble code of honor.
So they gave them a pass.
So they were given fortress confinement.
Fortress confinement, which basically meant they got put in a fancy timeout castle. They could receive visitors, read books, drink wine, and crucially, they kept all their civil rights. They kept their honor. But the anarchist with the pamphlet,
the left-wing anarchist, like those involved in the 1911 assassination attempt in Leipzig, or even just distributing radical literature, was viewed as a despicable, dishonorable felon.
per paper.
They were thrown into heavy labor penitentiaries, subjected to brutal conditions, and officially stripped of all their civil rights.
Make it make sense. How is shooting a guy in the chest honorable, but handing out a leaflet makes you a degenerate who loses your right to vote?
It comes back to how the state defined the underlying nature, or the vibes, as you might say, of a crime. The conservative legal code drew a sharp, almost aesthetic line between open crimes and secret crimes.
Open versus secret.
A duel was open. It was face-to-face. It required physical bravery and a willingness to die. Therefore, it was seen as an honorable transgression. But printing pamphlets in secret, organizing strikes behind closed doors, or plotting a rebellion,
That's sneaky.
that was deemed sneaky, cowardly, and base. It lacked the aesthetic of aristocratic bravery.
The state completely monopolized the power to define why you committed a crime. They didn't care about the actual damage you did to society. They cared if your energy aligned with the establishment.
That's a very modern way to phrase it, but it's completely accurate.
If you were a right-wing nationalist breaking the law, you were just an overenthusiastic patriot. If you were a left-wing socialist breaking the law, you were a moral cancer that needed to be surgically removed from society.
Exactly. The judiciary used the concept of a dishonorable disposition as a scalpel to excise political threats while protecting those who share their conservative values.
It's just so corrupt.
But this entire hypocritical honor system and the military's obsession with keeping dishonored men out of uniform was put to the absolute ultimate test when the world caught on fire.
1914, World War I begins. And suddenly, the state's obsession with military purity hits a massive, bloody brick wall called reality.
During the first years of the war, the military stubbornly maintained its policy: no disenfranchised felons allowed in the army. They still firmly believed ex-convicts would taint the honor of the fighting force.
But then the casualties started piling up.
Right. By 1916 and 1917, the situation on the Western Front was desperate. The slaughter of Verdun and the Somme had occurred. Germany was bleeding out. They were literally running out of men to hold the trenches.
So what do? The bureaucracy has to face the meat grinder. They decide to send the dishonorable criminals to the trenches, but they do it with a totally sick, twisted catch that shows they still couldn't let the obsession with honor go.
General Erich Ludendorff, who was the de facto commander of the German war effort at that point, realized they desperately needed the manpower, but he refused to let go of the moral hierarchy.
He had to find a loophole.
So, he instituted a deeply cynical new rule. Around 1,500 disenfranchised felons were pulled out of prisons and sent to the front lines. But Ludendorff explicitly ordered that these men could not wear the honorable uniform.
They literally sent them to war without the real uniform.
They were issued different clothing, and they were strictly stripped of the military collar patches that signified rank, unit, and honor.
That is literally having your cake and eating it too. You want my life, you want me to sit in a muddy trench and get shelled by artillery, you want my blood, but I'm not good enough to wear your fancy jacket while I die for you.
Ludendorff's logic was a masterclass in extreme moral hygiene and cognitive dissonance. He argued that these men were not fighting to restore their honor. They were simply paying off their physical debt to the state with their flesh and blood. They were allowed to die for the fatherland, yes, but the state still refused to give them their honor back. They were disposable bodies, nothing more.
It is so incredibly cynical. You were good enough to stop a bullet, but not good enough to be a citizen. But as the war dragged to a brutal end in 1918 and the German Empire collapsed into revolution, this ultimate moral weapon the state had built, the deprivation of honor, suddenly lost all its power.
The transition from the Empire to the Weimar Republic flipped the entire script on what it meant to be dishonored. We see a complete cultural inversion of social values.
It all hinges on a phenomenal historical moment, a quote from 1917. The revolutionary leader, Karl Liebknecht, is standing in a courtroom, facing the full wrath of the imperial justice system for his anti-war activities.
Very famous trial.
He knows he is going to prison, he knows he is going to be stripped of his rights, and he looks at the judges and shouts words that completely break the spell, "Your honor is not my honor."
It was a profound philosophical rejection of the state's monopoly on morality. Liebknecht was essentially saying, the things you value, militarism, class oppression, imperialism, are corrupt. Therefore, being condemned by you, being labeled dishonorable by your corrupt system, is actually a proof of my own moral integrity.
When the Weimar Republic was born after the war, losing your civil rights wasn't a mark of shame anymore for the working class. It was the ultimate badge of cool.
It totally was.
It was undeniable proof that you were revolutionary. If you went to an imperial prison and were labeled dishonorable, it proved you had actually fought against an unjust system. You weren't a sellout.
The psychological weapon of disenfranchisement completely failed. The state tried to brand these left-wing activists with a mark of shame, a scarlet letter. But the activists took that deprivation of rights and wore it like a gold medal. It gave them immense street credibility in the chaotic new political landscape of the 1920s.
It's exactly like when a controversial book gets banned by a school board and suddenly it shoots to #1 on the bestseller list because every teenager wants to read it. Or when a punk band gets arrested. The state's attempt to erase them only made them legendary.
However, while the meaning of the punishment changed for the revolutionaries, the Weimar Republic's justice system had a fatal flaw.
A huge flaw.
It was still staffed by many of the exact same conservative monarchist judges from the imperial era. They couldn't be fired. And they continued to use this tool, the deprivation of honor, but with even more blatant, radicalized political bias.
If you ever wanted proof that the justice system isn't blind, look at a Weimar courtroom. The judge isn't just peeking from under the blindfold, he's actively winking with both eyes.
That's a good way to put it.
Let's look at the mechanics of this hypocrisy by examining 2 specific cases from Bavaria between 1919 and 1922 to see how lopsided the scales of justice had become.
Case number 1, Eugen Levine. He was a left-wing communist leader who participated in the short-lived Bavarian Soviet Republic, a socialist uprising.
Okay, the left-wing leader.
He was tried for high treason. The judge, acting with extreme prejudice, sentenced him to death. But he didn't stop there. The judge explicitly ordered the permanent deprivation of Levine's civil honor, officially branding his revolutionary actions as entirely dishonorable and base.
Okay, now look at case number 2, Count Arcovalli. He is a right-wing radical nationalist aristocrat. He doesn't just participate in a protest or a political uprising. He literally assassinates the Prime Minister of Bavaria, Kurt Eisner.
A hugely significant event.
He walks up and shoots him in the back on the street. A cold-blooded political assassination. What happens to the Count when he faces the Weimar judges?
The judge gives Count Arcovalli a relatively light sentence of fortress confinement again, that comfortable, honorable imprisonment.
The fancy timeout castle.
Yes. But most crucially, the judge explicitly allows him to keep his civil honor. The judge wrote in his reasoning that the Count, despite committing a brutal murder, acted out of an honorable and passionate love for his country.
It is breathtaking hypocrisy. The left-wing organizer gets executed, and his name is legally dragged through the mud, his honor destroyed. The right-wing assassin gets a slap on the wrist, gets to hang out in a fortress, and gets to keep his dignity because the judge personally liked his nationalist politics.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the legal system in the Weimar Republic wasn't just biased. It was actively paving the road for extreme radicalization.
The judges were basically endorsing right-wing terror.
The mask of neutrality was completely gone. Judges were using their discretionary power, specifically the power to grant or revoke civil honor, to wage open political warfare from the bench. They were telling the public that right-wing violence was acceptable and honorable, while left-wing politics was a crime against humanity.
The law wasn't a set of rules anymore. It was just a weapon you picked up to smash your enemies. But there was one man who tried to stop this madness, who saw the catastrophic failure of this system and tried to fix it before it was too late.
Yes. In 1922, a visionary social democratic minister of justice named Gustav Radbruch proposed a massive, radical reform of the entire penal code.
What was his crazy idea? What if we stopped trying to crush people's souls, stop trying to legally erase them, and instead just try to help them get jobs and pay taxes? Sounds logical, right? In 1922, it was absolute political suicide.
Radbruch wanted to completely abolish the dishonor punishment. He was a pioneer of what we now call resocialization.
A completely modern concept.
He looked at the data and realized that stripping people of their civil rights, preventing them from finding work by branding them as dishonorable and officially excommunicating them from society didn't protect the community.
It just made them angry and desperate.
It just created a permanent, desperate underclass of resentful criminals who had no choice but to reoffend.
He looked at the system and said, this isn't justice, this is just state-sponsored bullying that actively makes crime worse. It's like modern debates about checking the box for felony convictions on job applications. If you don't let people work, how can you expect them not to turn back to crime? He wanted to integrate ex-convicts back into the community so they could be productive.
But his timing was tragically terrible. Germany in 1922 was a powder keg. The country was suffering from crippling hyperinflation. High-profile political assassinations were rampant. The foreign minister Walther Rathenau was murdered right around this time.
The chaos.
There was massive right-wing backlash against the Republic. In the midst of all this fear and chaos, Radbruch's logical, humane, evidence-based experiment was completely swallowed alive.
The public and the conservative politicians were too angry, too scared. When society is terrified, they don't want resocialization. They want vengeance. They want someone to suffer. So his reforms failed. The deprivation of honor remained on the books. And from the ashes of that failed reform, a new regime rose. A regime that took this entire concept of honor and mutated it into an absolute nightmare.
This brings us to the ultimate, terrifying plot twist of this history. We must examine how the National Socialist regime took these existing legal tools and completely dismantled the architecture of citizenship.
For over a century, from 1806 to the 1930s, we saw the concept of honor shift. It started as a baseline for the rule of law. You break the public trust, you lose your rights. Then it became a cynical political weapon used against the working class and revolutionaries. But under the Nazis, it became something entirely different. What happens when the state decides that honor has absolutely nothing to do with how you act and everything to do with your blood?
Under the Nazis, the concept of honor was entirely detached from individual moral behavior and surgically attached to race. With the implementation of the Nuremberg Laws in 1935, the regime legally declared that only those of Aryan blood could possess honor.
Which brings us full circle to Himmler's rage in 1941. That's why he was so mad at the judge.
Exactly. The Nazis restricted the deprivation of honor only to Aryans who betrayed the Volk. They explicitly, legally denied that Jewish people or other minorities had any honor to lose in the first place.
It's just so bleak.
When honor, and by extension, the right to exist in the public sphere, is based purely on race rather than action, the entire architecture of the law collapses. Punishment was no longer about what you did, it was entirely about who you were.
And that is the ultimate alienation, the total erasure of a human being by the state. So I want to bring this all directly to you, the listener. We've taken you on a century-long journey through German history. We watched the empire weaponize the law, we watched the republic fail to fix it, and we watched it descend into totalitarianism. And what does it show us?
It's a very clear warning.
It shows us that the very moment a government or any powerful institution starts arbitrarily deciding who is a qualified citizen and who is morally dishonorable, the iron gates of totalitarianism are already swinging open.
The historical warning is stark. When a society begins using access to the public sphere as a weapon of moral hygiene, it is walking a very dangerous, very familiar path. The mechanism of exclusion is seductive because it feels righteous to those wielding it, but it invariably destroys the foundation of equality.
So think about today. We live in a world of digital citizenship. When modern society tries to strip people of their platforms, their digital existence, their ability to earn a living, or their right to speak under the guise of moral hygiene, are we just repeating a 100-year-old German mistake?
It's a question we have to ask ourselves.
Where is the line between protecting the community from harm and legally, socially erasing a human being because we don't like their vibes?
It's the same invisible scissors, just cutting different fabric. The question is, and always has been, who gets to hold them?
Think about that. The next time you hear someone getting canceled or deplatformed, remember the 1851 Prussian Code. Remember how quickly a sacred right becomes a temporary lease traded for your decency. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning everything.